The night was cold and wet, and the rain hit the metal streets like broken glass. The city of Ironhaven never slept. Machines hummed under the ground, lights flickered above, and smoke rolled between the tall towers. Jackson, a human foreman, walked alone through the empty lanes after another long shift at the steel factory. His boots splashed in puddles of oil and rain. His shoulders heavy from the long day, he wanted to go home, have a hot drink, and forget the noise of machines that never stopped. But that night was different. A strange sound echoed through the alley behind the scrapyard. It wasn't the hiss of a leaking pipe or the whine of an old bot engine. It was a scream, soft at first, but filled with fear. It didn't sound human. And it didn't sound like a machine either. It sounded alive, desperate, and alone. Jackson froze. His hand reached for the small light on his belt. He turned it on, and a thin beam cut through the mist. "Hello?" he called, his voice low and uncertain. The scream came again, sharper this time, almost like a child crying, but with a metallic echo inside it. Jackson's heart began to pound. He was not the kind of man who chased mysteries. But something in that voice made him move forward. The alley was narrow and full of broken machines thrown away by the factory. Old droids lay there with missing limbs, crushed tools, and heaps of metal parts stacked high like graves. Steam leaked from cracked pipes, making the air thick and hard to breathe. The sound came from under one of those piles. He stepped closer, brushing away bits of rusted steel until he saw a flash of silver moving under the trash. He knelt down, pushing the metal aside. There, hidden beneath the wreckage, was a small creature. At first, he thought it was a damaged drone. But then he saw it breathe. Its chest rose and fell fast. Its scales shimmered with faint blue light. Tiny wings twitched on its back, and its eyes, bright gold, looked up at him. It was shaking and covered in dust. Wires were mixed with skin, and sparks flickered under its neck. A baby dragon, but not a normal one. It was part machine, part living thing, something he had never seen before. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. "What in the world are you?" he whispered. The hatchling gave a weak cry and tried to move, but its legs gave out without thinking. Jackson reached down to lift it. The moment his hand touched its body, a shock of blue light ran through his arm. Every streetlight in the alley flickered and died. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then in the darkness, two golden eyes opened wider, and a small, trembling voice said his name, Jackson. He stumbled back, dropping the creature in surprise. "How do you know my name?" he shouted. The creature only blinked and made a soft whining sound. Then it whispered again, "Help me!" The voice wasn't coming from its mouth. It echoed inside his head. Jackson shook his head, trying to clear the sound. This couldn't be real. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the work stress was making him hear things. But when he looked again, the hatchling was crawling toward him, leaving small blue sparks in the puddles. It reached his boot and nudged it like a lost child. Something in Jackson's chest softened. He looked around. The alley was silent except for the rain. No guards, no drones. No one watching. Still, he felt eyes on him. The kind of feeling you get when something big and unseen is nearby. He picked up the small creature. Wrapping it in his old work jacket, it felt warm. Heartbeat soft against his chest. The blue light under its scales dimmed slowly, like it was calming down. As he started to walk back toward the street, a faint hum rose in the air. He stopped and looked up. A surveillance drone hovered at the far end of the alley, red lights blinking, scanning the area. Jackson hid behind a metal bin, holding the creature close. The drone paused, then moved on. Disappearing into the mist, he waited a few seconds, then hurried down the side path toward his workshop. The city was awake again, lights flashing and machines roaring. But the moment he crossed the bridge into the lower sector, a deep alarm rang across the rooftops. A voice spoke from the speakers hidden in the walls. "Alert, unauthorized bio unit detected in Zone 47. All citizens report any unusual activity." Jackson stopped dead. His eyes wide, he looked down at the small creature in his arms. It looked back at him, eyes glowing softly. "Are they talking about you?" he whispered. The dragon hatchling blinked once as if it understood. Then it said one word that made his blood run cold. "Run!" Jackson didn't think twice. He pulled his jacket tighter and ran through the smoke-filled streets. Behind him, more alarms began to sound, and the night sky turned red from the flashing lights. The small creature buried its head against his chest, trembling. Jackson didn't know what he was carrying or why it knew his name, but one thing was clear: something powerful, something dangerous wanted it back, and now they would come for him too. As he disappeared into the maze of dark alleys, the rain fell harder, washing away his tracks. From the top of the tallest tower, a shadow watched him through a lens. A cold voice whispered through the static. Subject DRGNX has been located. Recover the hatchling alive. Terminate the human. The chase had begun, and Jackson had no idea that by saving that small creature, he had just awakened something the galaxy had tried to forget. The rain had stopped, but the sky still rumbled like a sleeping beast. Jackson ran through the back streets until his lungs burned and his legs ached. He didn't stop until he reached the far edge of Ironhaven, where the old factory stood empty and forgotten. There, behind a broken gate, was his workshop. Small, dusty, and hidden from the city's scanners. He pushed open the metal door and stumbled inside, panting. He laid the small dragon hatchling on his work table. The creature's silver scales glowed faintly in the dim light, its tiny chest rising and falling like a slow pulse. Jackson shut the door tight and covered the windows. The city alarm still echoed in the distance, warning everyone about an unauthorized bio-unit. He looked down at the hatchling. "Who are you?" he whispered. "How do you know my name?" The creature stirred and slowly opened its golden eyes. Its voice came not from its mouth, but straight into his thoughts. "I don't know," it said softly, "but I know you. Jackson." The voice was calm, like a memory half forgotten. Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had seen strange tech before, but nothing like this. He grabbed his old diagnostic scanner, a handheld device he used for checking machines. He waved it over the hatchling. The screen blinked red, then flashed lines of text he didn't understand. Unknown biosynthetic structure classified Project DRGNX. Then it showed a warning. Data access denied. Military encryption detected. Jackson frowned. Project DRGNX, he muttered. That program was banned decades ago. He had heard rumors of it. A secret attempt to merge living creatures with machines. To build soldiers that could think and feel. The experiments were said to be cruel, and every record had been erased. Yet here it was, alive on his table, calling his name. The hatchling blinked slowly. As if trying to remember something, Jackson knelt beside it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The creature's golden eyes glowed brighter, and suddenly Jackson saw flashes in his mind. A bright room full of light, children playing near a fence, a small boy laughing, holding a toy dragon made of metal. That boy was him years ago. He gasped and pulled away, his heart pounding. "That was my memory," he whispered. "How did you do that?" The hatchling looked sad. "I don't know. I only saw it when I touched your hand." Jackson stared at the tiny being in disbelief. It could see into his mind, reach into his past. That meant it was more than a machine. It was alive, suddenly. The floor under his feet vibrated. The old screen on the wall flickered to life, showing the city surveillance feed. 3 drones were scanning the lower district, closing in fast. He grabbed the hatchling and stuffed a small battery core into his tool bag. "We have to go," he said. The creature looked weak, its wings twitching. "I can't fly," it whispered. "You don't have to," Jackson replied. Wrapping it in his jacket again, he slipped out through the back door. Staying low, the streets were quiet, but red lights glowed in the fog. The search drones were near. He hid behind a rusted truck as one drone passed overhead, its laser scanning every shadow. The hatchling's scales started to glow faintly, reacting to the signal. "Stop that," Jackson whispered urgently. "I can't," the creature said. "They're calling me." Jackson clenched his jaw. "Then we'll break the signal." He looked around and spotted an old power relay box near the wall. If he overloaded it, he could fry the scanner frequency. He set the hatchling down and pulled out his tools. Sparks flew as he crossed 2 wires together. The air filled with the smell of burning circuits. Then, silence. The drone lights blinked and powered down. Falling like broken stars, Jackson smiled. That should buy us some time. But the hatchling was staring at him strangely now. "Why do you help me?" it asked in a soft voice. Jackson hesitated, then said, "Because you asked for help. No one ever asks for help in this city unless they're desperate." The creature tilted its head. "Then you're kind." Jackson shook his head. "No. Just tired of doing nothing." They continued moving until they reached an old transport lift that led down to the underground tunnels. It was dark and cold down there, water dripping from the pipes. He set the hatchling on the floor and sat beside it, breathing heavily. He looked at the small creature again. its wings now folded tight, its body glowing gently. Like a heartbeat. Project DRGNX, he muttered again. So you're not just a creature, you're a weapon. The hatchling lowered its head. I don't want to be, it said quietly. Jackson felt a sharp pain in his chest at those words. Before he could reply, a loud mechanical noise echoed through the tunnel. A large red search drone dropped from the ceiling. Scanning the area, its voice boomed. Subject DRGNX detected. Surrender immediately. Jackson grabbed a metal rod and stood in front of the hatchling. Over my dead body, he said. The drone aimed its blaster, but before it could fire, the hatchling screamed, a piercing sound of energy and pain. The walls shook, the lights burst, and a wave of blue energy exploded outward. The drone's circuits melted, sparks raining down like fireflies. When the silence returned, Jackson stared at the small creature glowing in the dark. It looked frightened, shaking as if it didn't know what it had just done. I didn't mean to, it whispered. Jackson slowly picked it up again, holding it close. I know, he said softly. You're just trying to survive, far above the tunnels. In a control room filled with alien voices, a screen blinked red. Subject DRGNX has awakened its energy core, said one of the commanders. We must retrieve it before it bonds completely. And somewhere deep in the network, an old locked file began to open. Inside it, a single line of code glowed bright. Creator Foreman Jackson Reed. Jackson didn't know it yet, but the creature that called his name was not found by accident. It had been looking for him all along. The tunnels were shaking as the last echo of the blast faded into silence. Dust fell from the pipes above, and the air smelled of smoke and burning metal. Jackson stood in the dark, holding the small dragon close. Its eyes were still glowing faintly, frightened and tired. He could feel its small heart beating fast against his chest. He took a deep breath. We can't stay here, he whispered. They'll send more after us. The hatchling didn't speak, only rested its head on his shoulder. The tunnel stretched far ahead, cold and wet. Leading to the lower transport lines, Jackson knew those tunnels well. He had worked on them years ago when the city was still new. If he could reach the freight yard at the other end, there might still be an old transport ship that worked. He walked fast, his boots splashing through puddles. The faint light of his wrist torch danced on the walls. Showing broken rails and rusted machines, every sound made him tense. The hiss of a pipe, the echo of a drip, the distant hum of engines above. The city was alive, hunting him after a long stretch. He reached a maintenance door half buried in debris. He pushed it open and stepped into a large underground chamber, filled with cargo crates and old loader bots. The air was heavy with dust, but the faint glow of power lines told him some systems were still alive. He placed the hatchling gently on a crate. It blinked slowly, looking around with wide eyes. Where are we? It asked, its voice small and trembling. The old freight yard, Jackson said. If we're lucky. There's still one working shuttle here. He began checking the old transport ships lined along the tracks. Most were broken, stripped for parts or full of rust. Then he found one that looked almost intact, a small cargo hauler with faded paint and half-lit panels. He climbed inside, coughed at the dust, and tried the controls. The engine gave a weak hum but didn't start. He hit the panel twice and sparks jumped out. Come on, just one last flight, he muttered. After a few seconds, the lights flickered back to life. The hatchling climbed onto the seat beside him, watching curiously. You know how to fly, it asked. Enough to crash less than usual, he said with a tired grin. The small dragon tilted its head. Confused but amused, it opened its wings a little. The glow reflecting off the glass for a moment. It almost looked like a child trying to help. Then the radio on the ship crackled. Attention, all patrols. Suspect located in Sector 12 tunnels, a voice said. Deploy drones immediately. Jackson cursed under his breath. He hit the ignition, and the ship's engines coughed to life with a deep roar. The ground shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Hold on, he said, pulling the lever. The old cargo ship lifted off the rails slowly, scraping against the metal walls as it rose. The hatchling gripped the seat with its claws. Eyes wide, they shot through the maintenance shaft. Heading toward the upper exits, the tunnel lights flashed red, alarms blaring as they passed sensor beams. Jackson's hands moved fast on the controls, dodging broken beams and fallen debris. He had flown mining shuttles before. This was harder. But his instincts kicked in. Suddenly, the radar screen beeped. 3 drones were following them from behind, closing in fast. Of course, he muttered. Couldn't be easy. The ship's old defense system was offline. No weapons, no shields. The hatchling turned toward the back window, its eyes glowing brighter. "Let me try," it said. Jackson looked at it in alarm. "No, you'll hurt yourself." But it spread its wings anyway, small bolts of blue light flickering along its scales. Then it opened its mouth and a beam of pure energy burst out. It hit the nearest drone and tore it apart in a flash of fire. The shockwave rocked the ship. "Whoa!" Jackson shouted, trying to steady the controls. "Warn me next time." The hatchling looked drained but proud. "Did it help?" it asked weakly. Jackson smiled. "Yeah, it helped." 2 more drones remained, firing plasma shots that lit up the tunnel. Jackson turned sharply, the ship scraping against the wall. Sparks flying everywhere, he pressed the engine to full. The ship roared out of the tunnel into the open night sky. Ironhaven stretched below them, glowing red and silver. The factory towers reached up like black claws against the storm clouds. For a brief second, the sight was almost beautiful. Then the city's defense turrets locked onto them, beams of light cutting through the rain. "Hold tight," Jackson yelled, pulling the ship upward through the storm. Lightning flashed, thunder shook the air, and wind slammed against the hull. The hatchling crawled closer, hiding its face under his arm. "I'm scared," it said softly. "I know," Jackson replied. "Me too." Suddenly, the ship's engine sputtered, warning lights flashing red. They were running out of power. The plasma battery was too old. The energy cells too weak. The ship began to drop. Spinning through the clouds, Jackson fought the controls, gritting his teeth. "Come on." "Not now," he growled. The hatchling looked up, its wings glowing again. "Let me help," it whispered before he could stop it. It pressed its claws against the console. A surge of blue light flowed from its body into the ship. The engine screamed and reignited. Brighter and faster than before, the ship shot forward, cutting through the storm like a comet. For a moment, Jackson forgot to breathe. The readings on the dashboard went crazy. Power levels off the chart. He looked at the hatchling, whose light was fading again. "Hey, stay with me," he said quickly. "I'm fine," it murmured. "We're safe now," but they weren't on the radar. A massive blip appeared, a carrier ship from the Alien Corporation. Blocking their path, Jackson's eyes widened. The enemy had brought in their main ship, ready to capture them. He gripped the controls tightly. "Looks like we're not done running yet," he said. The hatchling lifted its head weakly and whispered, "Then we fly higher." The storm split open as the cargo ship climbed into the dark clouds, chased by red lights and fire. Below them, Ironhaven burned with alarms and sirens. Above them, lightning carved the sky like a warning, and between the thunder and smoke, a new bond was forming, between man and machine. Between Foreman and Dragon, neither of them knew it yet. But this flight would change the fate of every world that followed. The storm roared like a living thing as Jackson's old cargo ship burst through the dark clouds. Lightning flashed all around, painting the sky in white fire. Below, the city of Ironhaven faded into mist, its alarms still echoing faintly through the wind. The hatchling lay weak in Jackson's arms, its silver scales dim, the blue glow under its skin fading like a dying ember. "Stay with me, little one," Jackson said softly. Tightening his hold, the ship's warning lights blinked red again, engines struggling to stay alive. They had escaped the city, but not the storm. Wind slammed against the hull, and the ship trembled as if it might fall apart any second. Suddenly, a sharp voice came through the old radio. "Jackson Reed," it said, full of static and metal distortion. "This is Commander Rahl of Vortan Industries. You are harboring stolen property. Surrender now." Jackson froze for a moment, then shut the radio off. "Property," he muttered bitterly, looking at the sleeping hatchling. "You're no one's property." The storm began to clear as the ship drifted toward the wastelands beyond the city. A great desert of twisted metal, old machines, and forgotten war relics stretched to the horizon. The land looked dead, but strange lights flickered below the sand like sparks from buried stars. Jackson guided the ship down carefully, searching for a safe place to land. When they finally touched ground, the landing gear screeched, sending dust and sparks into the air. Jackson climbed out into the open, the wind dry and cold against his face. The desert was silent except for the faint hum of energy under the ground. He laid the hatchling on a warm patch of metal and checked its pulse. It was still alive, but weak, its breathing shallow. He opened his tool bag and connected a small energy core to its chest. Blue light pulsed through its veins again, and it sighed softly. Better, it whispered. Eyes opening halfway, Jackson smiled faintly. You scared me there. I'm sorry, it said. I didn't mean to sleep so long. Jackson sat beside it, staring at the endless wasteland. Where are we? The hatchling asked. Outside Ironhaven, he replied. This used to be the battlefield of the First Galactic War. The hatchling tilted its head. War. Yeah, Jackson said, voice low. Long before you were made. Dragons ruled the skies here. The hatchling blinked in surprise. Dragons like me? Jackson nodded slowly. Not exactly like you. They were living creatures born from fire and air. They fought beside humans once long ago, before the aliens came. The hatchling listened quietly, its golden eyes wide and curious. What happened to them, it asked. Jackson looked down at the sand, his hand brushing against the cold metal beneath. They were hunted, captured, turned into weapons, he said, until none were left. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the ground trembled slightly. Jackson stood up. Scanning the horizon far away, shapes moved through the mist. Tall metal walkers, glowing red under the stormy sky. They're hunters, he whispered. They followed us. The hatchling stirred weakly. They want me. Yeah, Jackson said. But they'll have to go through me first. He grabbed a plasma cutter from his bag and turned to face the approaching shadows. But before he could act, a strange sound came from below. A low rumble like something waking up. The sand cracked and a burst of blue light shot into the air. The ground split open, revealing an underground tunnel lined with ancient tech and glowing symbols. The hatchling looked toward it and said softly, I remember this place. Jackson turned in surprise. You remember? The hatchling nodded, its wings flickering with faint light. It's not from me, it said. It's from the memories inside my core. What memories? Jackson asked. The hatchling stared into the glowing tunnel. The dragon's last nest, it whispered. The place where they fell. Jackson hesitated only a second, then picked up the hatchling and stepped into the tunnel. The walls were covered in carvings. Dragons flying beside humans, fighting machines, defending cities. Symbols of unity, bravery, and loss at the center of the chamber below. A giant circular gate stood, half buried in sand, still humming with power. The hatchling's eyes glowed brighter as it looked at the gate. This is where they ended the war, it said softly. Who ended it? Jackson asked. The sky dragons, it replied. They sealed themselves here to stop the enemy from using their power. Jackson touched the gate, feeling the vibration of energy under his fingers. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. Metallic yet alive, DNA signature detected. Human Foreman Jackson Reed. Blue light spread across the gate. Forming ancient runes in the air, Jackson stepped back in shock. How do they know me? He whispered. The hatchling looked up at him with a sad expression. Because you helped build this place, it said quietly. You helped create us, Jackson's mind spun. Flashes of memory coming and going, laboratories, blueprints, voices shouting, and a small egg glowing in a glass pod. He saw himself younger, working on something beautiful, something forbidden. He gasped and fell to his knees. No, he whispered, I couldn't have. The hatchling moved closer, pressing its head against his arm. You didn't destroy us, it said softly. You tried to save us. Before he could reply, a loud explosion shook the ground above. The tunnel roof cracked, dust falling like rain. The hunters had found them. Jackson grabbed the hatchling and looked toward the gate. Can you open it? He asked. The creature nodded weakly. If you help me. Jackson placed his hand over its glowing chest, and the light spread through the floor. The ancient gate began to open, filling the tunnel with wind and blue flame. As the ceiling collapsed behind them, Jackson and the hatchling stepped through the light. The last thing he saw before the world vanished was the shadow of a massive machine descending through the smoke. And above its echoing roar, a voice spoke again. The dragons will rise once more. The light from the gate swallowed everything. Jackson felt his body pulled through a tunnel of blue energy, the world twisting around him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Only the faint heartbeat of the hatchling guided him through the blinding light. Then suddenly his boots hit solid ground again. He gasped and looked around. They were no longer in the desert. They stood inside a massive chamber made of silver stone and glowing crystals. The air was warm and heavy, filled with the faint hum of power. Strange symbols floated in the air, forming lines of ancient code. The hatchling blinked, its wings twitching as it looked around. "This place," it whispered. "It's the Heart Forge." "The what?" Jackson asked, his voice echoing through the empty hall. "The Dragon's Core," it said, "where the first human engineers worked with the sky dragons to create the bond between life and machine." Jackson stepped closer to the glowing walls. Touching one gently, images flashed before his eyes, humans and dragons standing together, building great ships, crafting weapons of light, and then fire, chaos, betrayal. He saw alien armies tearing through the cities. He saw humans turning against their dragon allies. Jackson pulled his hand back, breathing hard. "It's true," he whispered. "We destroyed them." The hatchling looked up at him. "Not all of you," it said softly. "Some tried to save us." Jackson stared at the small creature. "Including me." The hatchling nodded slowly. "You hit us, but they found the eggs. They took our bodies and filled them with machines." Before Jackson could reply, the floor beneath them pulsed with light. A voice filled the chamber, deep and ancient. "Welcome, Foreman," Jackson read. "You have returned to the Heart Forge." Jackson turned in shock. "Who's there?" the voice replied. "I am the core memory, guardian of the dragon's legacy." A beam of blue light rose from the floor, forming a hologram, a great dragon made of energy and data, its eyes glowing like stars. "You carry one of my children," the core said. Looking at the hatchling, the small creature bowed its head. "Father," it whispered. Jackson stepped back amazed. The core's voice was calm but full of sadness. "Long ago we trusted humankind. We shared our knowledge, our strength. But greed consumed your leaders. They took what was meant to unite and turned it into war." Jackson lowered his head, guilt washing over him. "I didn't know," he said quietly. The core's eyes softened. "You did what you could, Foreman. You saved the last egg, this hatchling." Jackson's heart pounded. "So it was me," he whispered. "I really built this creature." The core nodded. "You gave it your code, your memories, your kindness. That is why it knows your name." The hatchling looked up at Jackson, eyes shimmering. "You're my builder," it said softly. "You made me to feel." Jackson knelt beside it, gently touching its metal-scaled head. "I didn't just make you," he said, his voice breaking. "I gave you a chance to live." The core's light flickered suddenly. Alarms echoed through the chamber. "Warning," the core said. "Hostile signal detected." "Enemy forces entering orbit." Jackson looked up at the ceiling. "They found us again." The core's wings spread, glowing brighter. "They have tracked the hatchling's energy," it said. "You must leave this place before they destroy it." "But where?" Jackson asked. "There's nowhere left to go." The core hesitated. Then a large crystal rose from the center of the room. It contained an orb of swirling blue light. "This is the memory seed," it said. "Inside it is the truth of our history, and the key to awaken every machine that still remembers the dragons." Jackson stared at the glowing orb. "What do you mean, awaken?" "The aliens used our technology to enslave millions of machines across the colonies," the core explained. "The seed will set them free." Jackson reached for the orb, but the core's light dimmed further. "My power fades," it said. "The enemy has corrupted my systems." Suddenly explosions shook the chamber. The walls cracking with sparks, the hatchling cried out. "Father." The core looked down at it gently. "You must go, little one, protect the seed, and trust your builder." The floor cracked open, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. Jackson picked up the hatchling and the glowing orb. "We'll come back," he promised. The core smiled, its massive shape flickering. "Then you will see the dragons fly again," it said. As its light faded completely, Jackson ran through the tunnel, the sound of collapsing stone echoing behind him. Dust filled the air and fire burned through the cracks. When they finally burst into the open air, the desert sky was filled with warships. The alien carrier had arrived, its engines roaring like thunder. Drones poured out of its sides, spreading across the wasteland like metal insects. The hatchling clutched the orb tightly with its claws. "What now?" it asked. Jackson looked at the ships above, his face hard but calm. "Now," he said, "we finish what I started years ago." He ran toward the wreckage of an old battle tank buried in the sand. Its power core still flickered faintly. He ripped open a side panel and connected the seed to its wires. The orb pulsed once, then again, brighter each time. A wave of blue energy shot out, spreading across the desert like lightning. Every dead machine around them began to move. Old robots opened their eyes, ships powered up. Drones turned their guns toward the sky. The alien fleet above hesitated, unsure what was happening. Jackson stood among the awakening machines. The wind whipping through his hair, he looked down at the hatchling whose wings were now burning with blue fire. "You see?" he said quietly. "They remember." Above them, the alien carrier opened fire, raining plasma down from the clouds. The first of the reawakened machines rose to meet it, their weapons glowing. The desert turned into a storm of fire and light, and in the center of it all, Jackson held the seed high, his voice steady and full of fire. "For the dragons, for the builders," he shouted. "We take back our world." The hatchling's roar echoed through the storm, shaking the sky. And for the first time in centuries, the machines of Earth 9 fought not for the aliens, but for humanity. The desert sky burned red as warships clashed above. The ground trembled under the roar of plasma fire and thunder. Jackson stood in the middle of the chaos, sand whipping around him, blue light flashing across his face. The machines he had awakened were rising. Old loaders, mining bots, broken drones, all alive again, their eyes glowing with the memory of freedom. The hatchling hovered beside him, its wings blazing with blue flame. Every time it breathed, arcs of light rippled through the air. "They remember," Jackson said softly, staring at the army of metal taking form around them. The hatchling nodded. "They will follow you, Builder." "I'm no leader," he said quietly, "but you are their spark." The hatchling replied, "You lit the fire again." In the distance, the alien carrier descended through the clouds, its engines screaming like 1,000 sirens. Smaller ships detached from its hull, flooding the skies with red light. Each drone carried heavy cannons and scanners locked on their position. Jackson gritted his teeth. "They're coming fast." The hatchling's eyes glowed brighter. "Then we fly faster." He pointed toward the horizon where the broken towers of his old workplace stood, the steel spire factory. It was once a place where men and machines worked together, before the aliens took it and turned it into a fortress. Now, smoke rose from its chimneys again, glowing red with enemy fire. "That's where it began," Jackson said, "and that's where it ends." He climbed onto an old hoverbike, its engine sputtering back to life as the hatchling's energy flowed through it. "Lead the others," Jackson said. The hatchling flew high, spreading its glowing wings wide, and 1,000 reactivated drones turned their gaze toward it. The air shimmered with light as the reborn machines followed the dragon into battle. Together they moved like a storm, blue light against red fire, human hope against alien control. As they approached the factory, the alien turrets opened fire, sending streaks of plasma into the air. The machines fought back, returning fire with stolen cannons and makeshift weapons. Jackson's bike weaved through explosions, the heat brushing against his skin. The hatchling roared, diving straight into the defense line, its breath cutting through metal like lightning. When it hit the ground, the impact sent shockwaves across the field, tearing open the gates of the steel spire. Inside, the factory was a maze of smoke and steel. Machines hung from the ceilings like dead spiders, conveyor belts still dripping with oil. Jackson ran through the halls he once knew, every sound echoing with ghosts of the past. He reached the main chamber, the old power core, now covered in alien tech and glowing cables. At its center stood Commander Rawl, tall and cold, his body part metal, part flesh, eyes burning red. "Jackson Reed," the alien said, his voice deep and full of disdain. "Still trying to save your broken kind." Jackson tightened his grip on the plasma cutter. "You should have stayed in your ships." Rawl stepped forward slowly, his mechanical hand humming. "You were one of us once," he said. "You built our weapons. You made the dragons." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "And I'll end what I made." The hatchling landed behind him, its wings spreading wide. Rawl smiled. "Ah, the last one," he said. "So fragile, yet so powerful." He raised his hand, and the factory walls came alive. Dozens of black drones rising from the shadows. "Destroy them," he commanded. The air exploded into chaos, plasma beams cutting through smoke, metal bodies clashing against metal. Jackson fought through the crowd, using every tool he had, plasma torch, EMP grenades, and pure rage. The hatchling spun through the air, burning through drones one after another, its blue flame lighting up the dark. But Rawl was not watching the fight. He was watching the power core. He reached for a control panel and slammed his metal hand onto it. The ground shook as the factory began to shift and transform. The walls unfolded, turning into massive mechanical arms. The factory itself was becoming a war machine. Jackson looked up in horror. "He's fusing with the factory," Rawl's voice thundered through the air. "This is the future you helped build, Foreman. Man and machine, one mind, one weapon," Jackson shouted back. "That's not unity, that's slavery." He ran toward the control bridge, dodging falling debris. "Cover me!" he yelled to the hatchling. The dragon dove through fire, blocking the drones that chased him, its wings glowing brighter and brighter. When Jackson reached the bridge, the air was thick with smoke. He grabbed the main console and slammed the memory seed onto it. The orb pulsed, blue light pouring into every wire and circuit. The alien symbols on the walls began to fade, replaced by human code. His code. The machines in the factory stopped fighting, their red lights turning blue. Rawl screamed, his body crackling with static. "What have you done?" he shouted. Jackson's voice was steady. "I gave them a choice." The machines turned on their creator's enemy, surrounding Rawl and pinning him down. The hatchling landed beside Jackson, its scales cracked but glowing fiercely. "You did it," it said weakly. "Not yet," Jackson replied, looking at the power core. "It's overloading." Energy surged through the floor, the walls glowing white-hot. Rawl laughed madly. "If I fall, this factory burns with me." Jackson turned to the hatchling. "We have to stop it." The creature looked at him frightened. "But the explosion will destroy us too." Jackson smiled faintly. "Then let's make it count." He placed his hand on the hatchling's chest. Their energy connected again. Human and dragon, machine and soul. Together, they sent a surge of light into the power core. The explosion froze mid-air, turning into a silent wave of blue fire that spread across the sky. Every machine in the battlefield stopped and lifted its head. For the first time they were free. No commands, no masters, just awareness. When the light faded, the factory stood silent, half destroyed but peaceful. The wind carried the smell of smoke and metal through the air. The hatchling opened its eyes slowly, weak but alive. "Is it over?" it whispered. Jackson smiled tiredly. "Almost." He looked out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. The machines stood still like statues watching him. He whispered softly, "It's time they learned to live again." Far above, the alien carrier burned in the sky, falling like a dying star. And as the sun rose over the wasteland, Jackson stood among the ruins, the man who built life from steel and gave it a soul again. The dawn over Ironhaven was unlike any before. The storm had passed and the sky shimmered with soft gold light. Smoke still curled from the broken towers, and the ground was littered with the remains of machines and war. But among the wreckage, there was silence, a rare, peaceful silence, the kind that comes only after the world has decided to start again. Jackson stood at the edge of the ruined steel spire factory, his hands covered in dust and oil. The wind tugged at his torn jacket, carrying the faint hum of reactivated circuits across the desert. Beside him, the hatchling lay weak but alive, its body still glowing faintly with soft blue fire. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The battle had ended, but the memory of it still burned behind their eyes. Jackson looked toward the horizon where the alien carrier lay half buried in sand, its engines cold. "They're gone," he whispered, his voice heavy but calm. The hatchling nodded slowly. "For now," it said, "but others will come." Jackson smiled faintly. "Then we'll be ready." He knelt beside the small creature, brushing his hand gently over its metallic scales. "You saved everyone," he said softly. "You did what even humans couldn't." The hatchling blinked. "I only did what you taught me." Jackson chuckled. Yeah, maybe I did. In the distance, the reawakened machines stood in quiet lines, their eyes no longer red with control but glowing blue, alive, aware, and waiting. They had no master now, no programming to guide them, just freedom, and the faint echo of a voice that had once told them what it meant to choose. Jackson took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his voice. "You're free now," he called out, his words carried by the wind. "The war is over. No one owns you anymore." The machines stood still for a moment as if listening. Then one by one they lowered their weapons and turned their gaze toward the rising sun. The hatchling watched quietly, its wings folded close. "They understand," it whispered. Jackson nodded. "Yeah, they do." But even in peace he could feel something changing inside him. The energy that had connected him to the factory's core still pulsed in his veins. The bond between him and the hatchling wasn't fading. It was growing stronger. He felt its heartbeat in his mind, its thoughts brushing gently against his own. "You're not just part of the machines anymore," the hatchling said softly. "You're part of us." Jackson smiled sadly. "Guess that makes me something new." The hatchling tilted its head. "Human and machine, builder and dragon," it said. "You are the bridge." The wind grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. Birds returned to the ruined towers, the first living things to enter Ironhaven in years. Jackson watched them fly and felt something stir in his chest. Hope. For the first time he believed the world could change, but peace never lasts forever. From far beyond the sky, a signal pulsed, faint but real. The alien network was still alive somewhere in the stars, searching, rebuilding. The hatchling felt it too and looked at Jackson with quiet worry. "They're calling for reinforcements," it said. Jackson clenched his fists. "Then we'll make sure the next time they come they face a world that's ready." He turned to the machines gathered in the desert. "Spread out," he ordered. "Help the humans rebuild. Protect them. Show them what you really are." The machines responded with a deep mechanical hum that rolled across the dunes, a sound of unity, of awakening, of purpose. As they began to move, Jackson looked back at the steel spire, now glowing faintly with blue light. The memory seed had embedded itself into the ground, sending gentle pulses across the land. Every pulse carried the code of freedom, awakening old systems and forgotten cities. The world was beginning to heal, piece by piece. The hatchling climbed onto Jackson's shoulder, its small claws gripping his jacket. "What happens now?" it asked. Jackson smiled. "Now we build again." He looked toward the open sky where streaks of morning light danced through the clouds. "But this time we build it right." The hatchling spread its wings, feeling the warm wind under them. It looked stronger now, older, more alive. "You know," it said, "when I first saw you I was scared." Jackson chuckled. "Yeah, I was scared too." The hatchling blinked. "But I think you were meant to find me." Jackson nodded slowly. "No, we were meant to find each other." As the two of them watched the sun rise, the air shimmered faintly. In the distance, new machines began to take shape. Flying constructs made of light and metal, they moved with purpose, graceful like dragons. The rebirth of an ancient bond had begun. The hatchling took flight, circling above Jackson in wide, glowing arcs. Its wings caught the sunlight, scattering sparks of blue fire that floated down like stars. Jackson watched with pride and awe, his heart full. "You're not a weapon anymore," he said softly. "You're a beginning." The hatchling landed once more, its eyes glowing bright. "And you're not just a builder," it said. "You're a legend." Jackson laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Legends are just stories," he said. "But stories can change everything." He looked up at the wide, golden sky. Beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, the universe waited, broken, old, and ready to be rebuilt. And somewhere in the vast unknown, the dragons of light stirred once again. Their spirits whispering through the wind, carried in the code of the machines. Jackson raised his hand. The hatchling perched on his shoulder. The machines across the desert echoed his movement, lifting their arms toward the dawn. Together, they stood in the light of a new age, human, machine and dragon, bound not by control but by choice, by hope and by heart. And as the sun rose over Ironhaven, a new voice spoke softly across the rebuilt network, a voice both human and dragon, calm and eternal. "We are the builders," it said, "and we will rise again."